In this section, we're going to take a deeper dive into the sympathetic nervous system and its three different pathways. So if we look at the sympathetic nervous system, you'll recall that it's having its preganglionic neurons leaving the spinal cord from T1 down to T2 or L2 or sometimes L3. And when they do that, they're going to come out to this, the first option that they're going to come out to is what's called the sympathetic trunk ganglia, or sometimes we call it a chain ganglia because all these ganglia are connected together. And what we're going to see is these preganglionic neurons can come in here and they can actually travel up or down a few segments. These ganglia are actually going to exist from the cervical region all the way down through the sacral and coccygeal region. So the ganglia exist in that, but the nerves come out of the spinal cord only in that thoracic and upper lumbar region. So it's kind of odd because you're going to have three specific ganglia in the cervical region, even though there's no nerves coming out here. You're going to have a superior, a middle, and an inferior ganglion. And they're going to have preganglionic neurons that are coming from these upper thoracic segments. They're going to synapse onto a posterior or postganglionic neuron. And in the superior cervical region, they're going to be going up to your head. So they're going to be affecting like your lacrimal glands, your salivary glands, your pineal gland, which you'll learn next time when we're doing the endocrine system. They're affecting all these glands in your head. The middle and the inferior ganglion are basically going to be going to your heart and stimulating different parts of your heart. Then we're going to have 11 or 12 thoracic ganglion in that chain ganglion. We'll have 4 or 5 lumbar, 4 or 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. Your book gives these variable numbers here, and our bodies are always a little bit different. But just for ease of learning, think you've got 12 vertebrae, you've got 12 spinal nerves, so you're going to have 12 thoracic ganglia. You're going to same with 5 and 5 for the lumbar and sacral region and 1 coccygeal. So that's one way that they're getting out. You've also got prevertebral ganglia. So this is coming, we say pre, it's kind of before the spinal cord area in here. These are going to be ganglia that are sitting out in your abdominal region primarily before they're going to the visceral organs. And in this case, the preganglionic neuron is actually going to pass right through that sympathetic chain ganglion. It's not going to synapse there. It's going to go out and synapse on this other ganglion that's kind of independent. And then from there, the postganglionic neuron will go to its end organs. These prevertebral ganglia have special names, and they're basically just for where they're located. And you don't need to worry about memorizing these, but recognize what they're for and how the neurons get there. We have a celiac ganglion, which is going to be right next to the celiac trunk, next to your aorta there. You'll have a superior and inferior mesenteric ganglion, so right where those arteries are coming out, the superior and inferior mesenteric arteries and veins. Aortico-renal, so it's going to be dealing with your heart and your renal gland or your kidney, and then a renal ganglion, which is just going to be sitting right next to your kidney. So they're just named for what they are. There's lots of these. I just gave you a few examples, but I want you to recognize that these guys are all prevertebral ganglia, as opposed to the sympathetic trunk chain or paravertebral ganglia are going to be running up and down right next to that spinal cord. So that's two ways. The third is going to be what's called a splanchnic nerve. And I'm going to show you the splanchnic nerve on another slide in more detail, but that's the nerve that's actually going to come through this prevertebral ganglion, or I should say the splanchnic nerve is the type of nerve that's going to be coming through to that prevertebral ganglion. So it is a preganglionic neuron that just bypasses that sympathetic trunk or chain and goes straight to that prevertebral ganglia. So here you can kind of see that sympathetic chain going right along the vertebral board or the vertebral column. So that's why we also call it the paravertebral ganglia, because they're sitting right there. And if we kind of look at these preganglionic neurons in a little bit more detail, I'm going to show you 3 different paths that they can take. So first, we'll just recognize that their cell body is in that lateral horn. Now you can see that here a little bit better. And this is going to be, again, anywhere from T1 down to L2 or L3. It's going to exit via the ventral roots, and those ventral roots are going to come to where that spinal nerve is, but that spinal nerve doesn't last very long. And that spinal nerve is going to have a branch off of it, and you learned about this last time, called the white ramus communicantes. I think I just called them the ramus communicantes or communicante rami. There's 2 of them. There's a gray one and a white one. Well, because this is a myelinated neuron, this preganglionic neuron is myelinated, this is going to be the white ramus. And it's going to come in here, and it's going to do a couple of things. It has its choice. One is it can synapse directly on a postganglionic neuron in this same ganglion, in which case it would go out. Or it can go up or down a few levels and synapse there, and then that postganglionic neuron will go out. So it can travel up and down that chain ganglion. That's what the preganglionic neuron is doing. And again, you'll recall these are myelinated fibers, and they're short. They're only going to this, wherever this first ganglion is, they're going there. The neurotransmitter that they're going to release is going to be acetylcholine. All the time, these preganglionic neurons are always going to be releasing acetylcholine. And that's what's the neurotransmitter going across that synaptic cleft there to get to that postganglionic neuron. Now, the postganglionic neuron is a little bit different. That postganglionic neuron can start in this, and I say can start in this ganglion. So if it's in this chain ganglion, it's going to then leave and go out, well, no matter what level it's at. So when it exits, it's going to exit what we call the gray ramus communicantes, because it is unmyelinated, if you remember. And then because this is sitting right next to the spinal cord, it's generally going to have a long way to go to get to its effector organ. So we say these postganglionic are long, unmyelinated fibers, and they're going to exit through that gray ramus communicantes. If it's in the cervical region, remember that cervical ganglia, it's going to go to the head, it's going to go to the heart, and actually it'll have some going to the neck and shoulders. If it's in the upper thoracic, it's going to be going to the lower abdominal and pelvic region, and it's going to follow the blood vessels in that case. For the sympathetic nervous system, these neurotransmitters that it's putting out are going to be epinephrine and norepinephrine. These are also called adrenaline. So adrenaline and noradrenaline, that's the British term for that, and that's what's going to give you your fight or flight response. Now, there's one exception, and the one exception is that in the sympathetic nervous system, it can release acetylcholine when it's going to your sweat glands. So the sweat glands are going to be your one main exception. Everything else post-ganglionic in the sympathetic is going to be epinephrine or norepinephrine. I wanted to highlight this splanchnic nerve a little bit more because sometimes it was hard to see in that previous slide. Recall that it's going to bypass that paravertebral ganglion. So here's that paravertebral or chain ganglion, and from about T5 to L2, a lot of those nerves are going to come out, and they're going to just go straight through that white ramus communicantes through the ganglion, and then right on out, not synapsing on anything until it hits those prevertebral ganglia. And that's where it's going to synapse onto a postganglionic neuron, which will go to its end organs. Now, some of them, and it's kind of hard to see here, but when you get down to your lower pelvic region, so your reproductive organs and your bladder, it looks like that nerve is actually going right into the organ without synapsing on another neuron. But I wanted to highlight one of those for you. You can see it's coming out here, going through that into the spinal nerve. It's going to bypass that ganglion, and it's going to go right in, and it does make it to this organ, but it is going to have a synapse right in here. So you can think of that ganglion being actually in or on the organ, and then you're going to have your postganglionic neuron reaching across. So there are two neurons in these sequences right here. So now we can put these three pathways all together. We started off with our standard preganglionic and postganglionic neuron. So here's our preganglionic neuron coming in. It can either synapse at the same level and go out, or it's going to go up or down a few levels before it synapses and then goes out the gray ramus communicantes. Remember, it's coming in the white ramus communicantes because it's myelinated. It's going to exit the gray ramus communicantes because it's unmyelinated. Then we had the splanchnic nerve, and that splanchnic nerve was coming in here, and it was just running straight on through, and it was going all the way. It's going to synapse on a prevertebral ganglion, so this is showing a celiac ganglion, or it may go to the organ and synapse on a ganglion right in that organ itself. That was the splanchnic nerve. And then the third one was what we called that modified postganglionic neuron. Remember, that's going to the medulla part of the adrenal gland, and that's what we had synapsing on a chromaffin cell, and that chromaffin cell was putting out our epinephrine and norepinephrine. So three different types of pathways to get our sympathetic nervous system activated and out to its effector organ. Here you can just kind of see, it's really, you can see this big long chain ganglia coming down here, and we're going to have all these networks of nerves coming out to their ganglion. So here you can see that celiac ganglion right next to the celiac trunk. We've got superior mesenteric ganglion, inferior mesenteric ganglion, where those arteries are coming out. We've got renal ganglion. So we've got ganglia all over, and it makes this big messy network. But if you just kind of think in your head, we've got this sympathetic chain ganglia, and then we've got these prevertebral ganglia around the visceral organs. And this will end this section by just looking at a slide of an actual cadaver, and you can see here's that chain ganglia going right next to the vertebral column. And this over here would be our inferior vena cava, splitting into the right and left common iliac veins. Then we've got down here, this is our adrenal gland sitting right on top of our kidneys. And we're going to have a bunch of our ganglia, which are really hard to differentiate, and I would never make you differentiate these on a picture like this. This will be your celiac ganglia, your aortico-renal ganglia, different renal ganglia. Here's a superior mesenteric ganglia. The inferior would be down below here. But this kind of gives you a greater perspective of what these autonomic ganglia are doing here for your sympathetic nervous system.